Well, in the last couple of months, actions that have taken place in other parts of the country are now starting much-needed conversations. At Wish TV, we're giving leaders and the community an opportunity to share their voice.
We had an opportunity to spend time with Aleesia Johnson, the superintendent of Indianapolis Public Schools. Hear what she had to say in tonight's We Stand Together.
Teaching the younger generation. For some, it's a job. Others might consider it an adventure. But for her, it's a way of life. It's not just what she does, but how she does it. Aleesia Johnson, the first African-American woman to be named as superintendent for Indianapolis Public Schools, the largest school district in the state. She's been a coach, an innovator, a leader. For her, it's her sweet 16 in education. And over those 16 years, she knows the importance of connecting with students and families on all levels. And during these times, as IPS deals with the coronavirus pandemic, she still makes sure there is a focus on a variety of issues, including hosting conversations about the topic of race and how students and adults can work together.
You know, I think what science tells us and research tells us is our children at a very young age start to notice very naturally the world around them, differences and similarities between people. And that's a perfect time to start having conversations about race, about different people who live in the same community and share space together, and to help our children really process and talk about and think about how those differences can be wonderful and special, and what make us all really unique. I think there was something so very graphic and very so explicit about the way in which he was killed that struck us as Americans in a really powerful way. I still have not actually watched the full video and only seen pictures because, quite frankly, the trauma of that I prefer to not experience for myself personally. But I think even the images of his death were so explicit, and as a country, we've not ever reconciled this injustice against specifically the African-American community. And I think his death really brought that to the forefront in such a powerful way that there are conversations we cannot afford. There are injustices that have been committed against a specific group of people that we must reconcile as a country in order to move forward. It is a delicate dance. I think that it's important, though, that we are telling the story of our history. There are facts. There is data. There are events that have happened in our country, and when we work to sort of put a positive sort of sunshine spin on these things, then we are not serving our children well. I believe that we can know our history, learn the mistakes of our history so that we're not bound to repeat it. And if we think that we just don't want to be that uncomfortable, we just don't want to expose our children in quite that way, we are missing the opportunity to make sure we are equipping our children with knowledge and the mindset to not repeat those same mistakes. And so it's really a missed opportunity if we are not telling sort of the full story of our history as a country. I have a soon-to-be 8th grader, 6th grader, and 5th grader, and we have a lot of conversations in our home about race, about racism, about institutional racism, about the history of our country. And that's what we talked about. We took our children downtown after protests had happened and riots had happened, and I wanted to have a conversation with them around why people would choose to express their anger in the way they did. Why are they mad in the first place? And it was just a history lesson. Here are the ways in which Black people in America have been treated over time for no fault of our own. And so it's important I want my children to understand that their great grandfather was jailed during the civil rights time for integrating the lunch counter in our community. They know that story. And, he's with us today and can tell that story about why that was so important to him. And so I want them to understand the history. And I also want them to understand their own individual sort of history of resilience and strength and courage that they come from. There's a lot of power they can get from knowing that is the tradition of the community from which they come. And so it's important for me, for my children, to understand that about themselves and about their community. There's no doubt about it. Those disparities have been really laid to bear during this time. There are things that we knew existed. But again, in the same way that I think George Floyd's murder has brought to the forefront in a very explicit way injustice, the same thing has happened as a result of this pandemic. Things like, lack of internet access in homes, for so many of our children, things like food insecurity, things like the ways in which COVID has disproportionately impacted Black and Brown communities, not because there's a genetic predisposition to COVID-19, but because oftentimes those communities are living in neighborhoods, in communities where those conditions don't support the healthiest, highest quality life that you can live. And so COVID has put all of that on full display during this time, and I think has caused us, and hopefully will continue to cause us to have some very real, very explicit, intentional conversations around we don't have to accept things as they are. We do not. And we have the ability to change if we choose to. First and foremost is that we're creating the conditions in our schools, the very best conditions for our students to learn, to be successful, to live a life of choice where they have the knowledge, the skills, the mindsets, the competencies to go forward into the world and do and be what it is they want to do and be, that they have choices. So that's my first priority, is to be sure I am leading our district to creating schools that create that for our children. And then I think the other thing is that there is real power in our students getting to see me in this particular seat as the leader of the organization, as a Black woman. There's a lot of power in that for young women of all races. There's a lot of power in that for young men of all races to say, this is what is possible. We should celebrate that it's great. On the other hand, IPS has existed for over 100 years. And so we should also ask ourselves the question, why did it take so long? Because certainly I'm not the first Black woman to be qualified to do it. I'm the first who got the job. And so I think those two things have to always be there, a celebration that there's progress being made, but also a question of what does it mean that it's taken this long to get to that point. I would say to our students now and those who will be going out into the workforce after this academic year is to never sort of question or doubt what is possible. No one expected to be where we are 5 months ago, 6 months ago, and yet I've seen our schools, our district really pivot in ways that we would have thought nearly impossible 6 months ago that seem very possible and feasible now. And so I want all of our children to sort of believe in what is possible for them, while understanding there are real barriers, there are real obstacles, right, that may exist. And yet there's so much that is possible. And so I would want them to know and understand that the resilience, the strength that they have within them, once focused and committed on a goal, that they can certainly move forward in achieving.
Our We Stand Together series will continue tomorrow night on News 8 at 10. And remember, you can see all of our profiles online at wishtv.com.